Was it always supposed to end this way? Was she just delaying the inevitable? Hello, welcome to this character analysis of The Queen in Red, a cautionary tale about all the different facets of toxic perfectionism and what it can do to a person. I'm really excited to read the story for you, and then we'll get into dissecting the story, characters, themes, and all that jazz. It's a fantasy-style story. It's got kings, princesses, vampires, and soul-crushing tragedy that makes me wonder why I am the way I am. In my opinion, it's a good video to listen to while you cook, clean, or maybe even draw along with me, or fall asleep to if that's your jazz. So, with that short little introduction out of the way, I hope you like the art, I hope you like the story, and let's get into it. Our story starts with a little girl, Savinica, who is adopted into royalty by King Lucian Alvesric. He's the king of a rather secretive kingdom. The entire world knows this kingdom to be the most peaceful kingdom, its isolation a way to protect its peace. It protects its peace with the largest military force of any other kingdom, though no one alive has seen them ever use it, and it's neighbored by an equally solitary druidic kingdom. Through the kingdom's mystique, rumors have spread that the citizens never go hungry, despite not even having to work, that people try to get in and no one wants to leave. That is how the world perceives it, however, as the current king masterfully crafted this appearance after he murdered the previous royal family and usurped the throne. See, this kingdom used to be paradise, and now lies in ruin as the biggest vampiric domain in the realm. To the king in white, the vampire king, Lucian Alvesric. The citizens starve and work to build their own graves. People can come in, workers can come in, but no one gets out. The entire land is nearly entirely barren. The streets are littered with broken lives and ransacked homes. The kingdom a cruel twist of the paradise this place used to be, with all the life siphoned out of it into the only outlier of this kingdom, the palace. A marble and ivory masterpiece. Pure white roses barricade the entrance along with bloody heads of traitors on spikes. A gorgeous and grand warning to anyone who dares to even think of leaving or, heaven forbid, rebelling. This leads us inside these grand palace walls, through the ivory and pristine white to Savinica and her father's lives, just as perfect as the kingdom surrounding them. When she was little, Savinica, as most young kids are, but Savinica especially, was so curious. And she was in a castle full of art. Paintings 10 times her size, sparkling marble statues that shone like the ivory walls that housed her, 3 libraries, and anything for a curious, bubbly young mind to feast on. But this curiosity was a spark, and a spark can turn into a fire. A crack can tear down a wall. Savinica's spark was something her father tried to snuff out as soon as he saw it. See, to him, she wasn't a daughter. She wasn't a child to be nurtured. She was a future heir to the throne that needed to be trained. He wanted his kingdom to outlive him if he ever somehow passed away, or maybe a scapegoat if the people ever decided to revolt. Such a strong personality needed to be contained as soon as possible if he ever wanted her to think and act exactly as he did, which was essentially, in every way, perfect. As soon as she was old enough, she was put into as many private tutoring classes as possible for her age, all held within the castle walls, of course. Isolation. From morning until nearly night, her schedule was wholly controlled. When she did well in her classes and was obedient, afterwards she'd sit in the grand dining hall with her father and enjoy a banquet of nearly everything she desired. She was still human to enjoy this. Her father never ate. Any interaction she had outside of tutors who knew not to be too kind or warm to Savinica, as per her father's orders, would be through the undead servants roaming the halls, ready to fulfill her every wish. Her every wish, except for when she did something out of line. Well, what is out of line in the eyes of a father expecting perfection? This would fall under if anything about her behavior in class or her conduct outside of class was anything less than proper and completely obedient then she would be quite easily stowed away in her room without food. An easy solution for a king who didn't really want to be too close to her in the first place. Too tired in class? She could last 3 days without food or seeing the sun, and if she ever asked her father for a break, easily a week. Isolated and starving. Coal only turns into diamonds through pressure, after all. In the beginning, she knew deep down this had to be wrong in some way, and this is really where that wretched spark of personality she had shone through. She'd regularly complain about how unfair this was, be locked away, be obedient for a week, and then the cycle would repeat. She quickly learned that this was simply how things were supposed to be. But after a few years of this, one saving grace would enter Savinica's life in her early teens. Remember how I said her father was good at keeping up appearances? Well, a lot of keeping up appearances is attending various galas, balls, and general events to rub elbows and liaise with the other kings and queens. He had let the other royals of the other kingdoms know he had a daughter, and was hounded for years to bring her out. Everyone wanted to meet the new royal of the Alvesric family, especially the queen of the neighboring Druid kingdom, because she had an only child as well, a daughter that would also be around Savinica's age. So he eventually caved as to not make anyone suspicious. If he'd have had it completely his way, she would be totally isolated from the outside world. More easy to mold and control that way. But he had to give in. So maybe 3 times a year Savinica was allowed outside, but only to attend these public appearances. Of course he told her exactly what to say and what not to say. Namely the whole thing about not telling anyone he's a vampire and also their kingdom is a hellscape. Other than that, it was the normal best behavior, don't be a disappointment to me in public. Remember, your worth is defined by your role as royalty. Just the, usual parenting. She knew how bad the punishment could be when she did something wrong in private, so the thought of doing anything wrong in public terrified her enough to keep her straight and obedient. So, dressed up in the perfect stark white silks and platinum jewelry, staple colors of her father's image, it was at her first attendance of some coronation of a different kingdom that Savinica found she was luckily rather good at pretending to be perfect in front of others. Always well-behaved, standing straight, and rather regal. But through being fawned over by all the other attendees meeting her for the first time, one person managed to somewhat see through her well-crafted exterior. A girl with long curly hair as auburn as autumn leaves, freckles scattered along her face like stars, and eyes as dark as the earth. Her attire was a stark contrast to Savinica's. Maybe that's what made the two of them notice each other along with their similar age. Compared to Savinica's silver and white silk structured dress, she wore a looser fitting emerald dress bound with gold. She seemed way more confident and less restricted than Savinica, so she happily tried to strike up a conversation with our darling princess, and introduced herself as Lenor, the princess of the Druids. Savinica, never having spoken to someone other than a teacher or her father, was incredibly awkward, but that kind of endeared Lenor a bit more. They ended up talking nearly the whole night through while Lucius was busy with other attendees. If being herself felt so good and seemed to be doing so good in making herself a new friend, then what else could be wrong about her father's teachings? Lenor asked if they could ever visit each other after the ceremony is over, and Sav doesn't give any details, but lets her know that her dad doesn't like her going out of the kingdom for safety, and Lenor says it's no problem. She'll just come to her. Sav really tries to discourage this, but Lenor doesn't get the vibe. And before anything more can be said, Lucien breaks up the conversation, simply by resting his hand on Savinica's shoulder and telling her it's time to go. Normal on the surface, but Sav could feel the tension. The last thing Lucius needed was Savinica having a friend. Someone to help her escape. God forbid someone to make her feel worth more than her role as an heir to the throne. So when they got home, Savinica waited with held breath to hear what she did wrong. But to her surprise, her father seemed concerned for her. He explained that she couldn't trust people. She was in these walls to keep her safe, and he would hate to see her get hurt. People can't stay in her life forever, and she needs to focus on running her future kingdom. This palace wouldn't leave her. Her money wouldn't leave her, and her power couldn't leave her. But people could. This, what seemed to be care, surprised Savinica. She was always so sure her father didn't care about her, even if she was holding out the hope for him to, but maybe this proved that everything he was doing was for her benefit. If this situation was so serious for him to break from his cold character, then maybe, even if she was sad she was told to not get attached to Lenor. This proved that however hurt she was by her father's coldness, or punishments in the form of, isolation and starvation, maybe they weren't punishments. They were needed corrections. Maybe everything that happens is okay, and she should be more willing to step into this role even if it felt wrong on some level. Because clearly, after everything her father has just said and the way he's acted, he must care about her. Sav would have been around 15 or 16 at this point, so her studies were only increasing. The work, papers, lessons, recitals, if it was overwhelming before, then this was breaking. After seeing her father was doing this for her benefit, she truly was trying her hardest, but the workload was so heavy. Her perfect efforts slipped one day. Whatever it was a mistake. And this time, fearing that hunger, that starvation, that pit in her stomach, she managed to get the courage to fight back. She knew she messed up that day, so when she heard the footsteps approaching her door, scared she'd be locked inside, she ran to the door before it could be locked and burst through the open door. Savinica didn't know where she was going, but she knew she didn't want to be locked inside of her room again. For however long that could be, if the workload was increasing, surely her punishments would too. She hid away in one of the castle's libraries, and somehow, like he was watching the whole time, Lucius found her immediately, with a look of cold, controlled rage on his face. Without a word, his clawed fingers grabbed Savinica by her hair and dragged her out of that library. He was yelling so much and so wide, she thought his jaw was about to unhinge just so he could yell louder. She saw the red in his eyes, the fangs, and too strong a grip. As much as she feared him in that moment, she wondered and feared that she might be like that one day, as he screamed. How dare you act this way? What kind of a person are you? You're better than this. Don't you want to be better than this? Are you so pathetic you can't handle a punishment that you created for yourself? You couldn't handle a little bit of studying, and now you can't handle just sitting still for a while? These words were the only thing occupying her mind as she sat alone in her bedroom once again. The only breaks for her thoughts were the rumbling in her stomach. What he said made sense. She was terrified, but if she didn't act that way, she wouldn't be in this situation right now. She knew he cared about her. He had to. This must have just been so disappointing to him for him to act that way. It wasn't a question. This was her fault, right? She saw the sun set 7 times while writing at her desk. This time was now valuable, to catch up on her studies and eliminate any chances of mistakes being made in the future. This time in isolation, maybe it was a gift, a chance to get better, a chance to be perfect. Who wouldn't want to be perfect? It was at her desk that her time was interrupted, a tapping sound. However, it wasn't coming from her door, but a tapping at her window. Looking over, she saw a raven, a rather peculiar one. It wasn't entirely black. The light catching the soft, smooth feathers revealed a more red undertone, and its eyes weren't entirely black, but a rather deep, rich brown, like the earth. It couldn't be. Could it? Savinica curiously went to her window and opened it. The bird tilted its head to the side, and Savinica said, "Hello." Not sure if she'd get a response, but the response she did eventually get was certainly a surprise, as in a flurry of feathers and light, The familiar face of Lenor was stood before her, mischievously smiling. Savinica freaked out and told her to be quiet. She had no idea what her father would do if he found someone else was here, but her happiness at seeing someone, anyone who was alive and could maybe keep her company just for a few minutes. Just for a few minutes. Someone who seemed actually happy to see her. All this kept her from telling Lenor to go home right there and then. The two quietly, but happily, spent the next few hours with each other, learning about how the other one lives, and Lenor eventually told Sav that she didn't really like the idea of being a queen one day. There was just so much world to explore. She didn't like the idea of ruling over something she'd never get to see. This in turn led to Savinica venting her frustrations with how she's living, and quite casually mentioned how her father treats her, to which Lenor was obviously shocked and tried to comfort Savinica, but she truly didn't understand why she needed comforting. She didn't understand what her father was doing was wrong. He was just correcting wrong behavior. But Lenor's ideas of traveling, seeing, leaving, she admitted that dream sounded nice. Lenor joked that they could both leave and be free together, and Sav laughed it off, but the thought lingered for longer than she'd like to admit. Eventually, after more surprisingly easy conversation with each other, Lenor realized she'd need to get back soon, and Savinica sadly said goodbye. But for the first time, she felt that warmth. The warmth of kindness and hope. Suddenly, the long stretches of being locked away seemed a bit more palatable. Not by much. The hunger was still lingering, but the loneliness was feigning. It was another 2 weeks before Savinica was let out of her room. The later stretches of days in her sentence weren't spent doing anything other than lying on her side and holding her grumbling stomach. The sounds of it churning and crying out for food echoed through her head. Eventually, she was let out by a servant holding a silver platter of warm, fresh food. Like an animal, Savinica scrambled out of her bed and lunged for the food. It scattered to the floor in her desperation, but that didn't stop her from eating off the floor. Each bite, a piece of solitude, but a pinching reminder of why this was happening in the first place. Because of her, she deserved this. Down on the ground on all fours, her hands dripping in the blood from meat and the grease, she heard her father say her name from above her. When she looked up, she saw he looked so disgusted at the sight of her like this. She couldn't imagine what she looked like right now. He told her to get herself ready for her daily classes and left. Her head was so clouded that she didn't even know what time it was, but sure enough, when she looked behind her, the sun was beginning to rise. She took a moment to slow her breathing, calm down, and collect herself. That disgusted look was appropriate. This was no way for her to act. But was he totally in the right here? She had an idea that Lenor might not have liked what just happened. If you're enjoying the story so far, please consider liking and following. It means and helps a lot. I'd like to be able to keep posting and drawing, but I can't really do that without the support of a few clicks, and I'll always try to keep posting stories you like. It's a small tiny community I've got here, but the more the merrier, right? Okay, let's get back into it. The years went by. Slowly, through Lenor's surprise visits, Savinica began seeing her worth, really. She still liked the idea of holding some position of power, the money, the things that were sturdy and promised to her, like her father said they were, but adventure, freedom, love? How amazing could that be? Through the years, this settled into some kind of routine. Lenor's presence helped with the moments of isolation, the loneliness going away kept Savinica going, but that animalistic need to consume could never be fought away. Each time she got locked away, it was for slightly longer, and when she got let out, the food would be better and better, always waiting for her. However, slowly the time spent on imperfections lessened. She got good at handling the pressure of training, classes and lessons that prepared her to be perfect. That's what she was doing this for. She wanted to be perfect. She wanted to be good. But, quite noticeably, Savinica seemed happier and happier with each visit from her darling Lenor. Each visit was another promise of a brighter future. The idea that they could both leave and be happy together became more and more real. But what also became real was the dread of leaving this life behind. Leaving the security behind. So, one day, at one of their end-of-day banquets, as Savinica had been quite obedient recently, enough to enjoy such feasts regularly, her father brought up subtly that he knew. He knew about Lenor's secret visits and keeping Savinica company. And Savinica immediately started apologizing. She didn't mean to go against any orders, and she's not been doing anything else wrong recently, so he cut her off. It was okay, he said. She froze, in surprise and curiosity. He reinstated the conversation he had with Savinica all those years ago when she first met Lenor. He didn't just want Savinica to not get hurt. She was old enough to know that one day, if she cares about anyone, she would lose them. She's human now, but soon, to ascend to the throne, she'd have to be a vampire like him. I mean, how else would they ensure such a long rulership? Besides, he knows Lenor wants Savinica to leave with her, and does she really not find that the least bit suspicious? Lenor would be lost without Savinica on her own, and Lenor is much more unruly than Savinica. Can she be sure she's just not jealous? Savinica has a much brighter future ahead of her than Lenor. It would make sense as to why she'd want to drag Savinica down to her level. Savinica is so close to being truly perfect. Why would she let someone so chaotic and low corrupt what a good queen she could be? These doubts were so carefully and beautifully woven and sewn into her mind. It made sense. The way he was speaking, the care, the compassion. The caring father appearance was nearly enough to convince her there and then that staying and following in her father's footsteps was the right choice. It was the safe choice. But what he said next made the world around her run clear. Besides, when Savinica gets turned into a vampire, if she ever proves herself worthy enough, then hunger would no longer be a problem, would it? She thought about that. No more hunger. Savinica pleaded for her to be transformed there and then, and her father asked if she was sure she thought she was ready. She insisted. He thought for a moment and eventually agreed. So, closing the distance of the dining table, Lucian grew closer to Savinica. She didn't know what to anticipate. The loss of life, it weighed heavy, but the promise of an eternal satiation was greater. And as he stood in front of her, she waited, and for the first time in her life, Lucian knelt down in front of his daughter, opened his arms, and hugged her. He was so cold, but it seemed so genuine. The warmth of comfort made up for it. He did care about her. She sighed, some relief of happiness. The freedom from her doubts and this breath of relief would be her last. With a stab of leeching blood like poison through her neck, Savinica could feel herself growing colder and colder. Her eyelids grew heavy and she slipped into death, her new eternal state. Her eyes opened to see her bedroom. She felt the need to take a breath, even opened her mouth to do so, but of course, nothing came in or out. The air around her felt so isolated from her body, no longer a part of the world she was in. In an attempt to get her head straight and figure out what time it was, how much time had passed, and wake up from death, she sat up and, as soon as she did, that pit in her stomach didn't just reopen, it clawed its way through her. That hunger she had felt before was nothing compared to this. Before she still had air in her lungs, blood running through her veins, a beating heart. Her gut was only one thing, but now there was only one thing that could keep Savinica running. And it burned with the desire for a life she no longer had. The longing for blood. It was insatiable. The twisting knot in her stomach clouded any form of thinking she could possibly have. She needed to get out of this room. Why? Food. She was panicked. Why? She was hungry. It all came back to that deep, darkest desire to feast, to feel her teeth sink into something warm on her tongue, something metallic to fill her senses. The sun set 7 times while Savinica screamed to be let out, her visceral, deep cries shaking the palace. Her claw-like nails scraped and scratched at the door. She even considered her chances out the window. The window. A familiar tapping came from the window. Her red eyes looked over to the glass. The raven. Her Lenor. The shape of the raven gave way to such a concerned woman. Those dark brown eyes searching for any sign her Savinica was okay. Her lips parted into a frown that pained Savinica to see, but that pain was no match for the pain in her gut as she inched towards the silver platter, the reward of being locked away so long. No. Lenor. Her Lenor. The light of her life. She was so bright, so colorful. Her skin was so pink. A hint to the blood underneath. Underneath just a few layers of skin. Soft, warm skin. Lenor sighed in relief, seeing Savinica approaching the window to let her in. It all happened so quickly that sigh of relief was her last. Maybe so quick her mind didn't have the time to process the betrayal. Maybe it could be slow enough to realize what happened and to forgive, but however fast or slow, it still ended with Savinica's dry, cracked throat relaxing against the river of blood. Her hands grasping at the last of her food, her love, her meal. After it was done, Savinica's mind rushed with relief and satiation, a satiation she had never felt before. And after that satiety washed away, the rising realization as to what she had just done settled in. Her hands, once gripping the flesh she feasted upon, now gently held the last of her love. Eyes that looked at her with such need and coldness, filled with remorse. Such deep remorse. The snapping and crunching that filled her mouth mere moments ago was replaced with quiet, shaking sobs. Sobs of regret, guilt, horror at what she had just done, that only grew into screams of anguish that filled those hollow castle walls. When her throat ran dry again, she limply fell back, still holding Lenor, soaking in the actualization of what had just happened, what she had just done. The last thought running through her mind was the question, why? Through the hours of guilt and grief, she realized that it was all him. It was always her father. He wanted her to be this way. He said she'd never be hungry. The cold, blood-soaked skin of her love proved that was a lie. But he also said if she got close to someone, she'd get hurt more than she could ever know. But maybe this was just proof. She wasn't supposed to be with Lenor ever. She acted imperfect, and this was her punishment. Now, as she sat holding what remained of her sweet, sweet Lenor, her father wanted her to be this. She hated that he succeeded, but now, what else could she be? Now, thoroughly cold, truly aimed for perfection. She was promised to be queen one day. If she was going to be all-powerful, rich, and perfect, she didn't want anyone standing in her way anymore. Through the cold blood and fighting of her father, she didn't view him as her father anymore. She didn't even view him as the one who ruined her life after a certain point. She just viewed him as something getting in the way of her perfection. The one thing he may have failed to realize is that through his parenting, he truly did manage to make Savinica perfect for his role. Too perfect. Too cold. Too angry. And managed to make her the perfect one to take his place. His last thought was that of relief, knowing his kingdom would be in good hands, in the hands of someone just like him. And thus, with the tragic passing of her father, Savinica surpassed the King in White to assume her role as the Queen in Red. Alright, the story's over. I hope you enjoyed it. Now that we're done with the story, now we can get into the real meat and bones. Get it? Meat and bones, one of the themes of the story. Oh shit, one of the themes of the story? This is a segue about the themes. I'm so smart. Oh my god. I hope that made sense. Summary of what I'm talking about. Now that we're done with the story, we're gonna get into the themes. There we go. That's my segue. I did it. Okay, theme number one. Before we dissect the characters, let's get into the theme of food and lack thereof. The biggest motif or object in this story. In this story, as it relates to toxic perfectionism, I decided to make food represent the unhealthy reward and neglect system that you do to yourself when you start falling into toxic perfectionism. Anytime Savinica does good and gives into those toxic perfectionist thoughts, she's rewarded with an abundance of food, more than she needs and can be satiated completely. However, if she slips up even once, she is so horribly treated that she starts to think she deserves it. And this brings us to Lucien. So now we can get into the characters. Yay! Lucien is the one character I've made that doesn't ever act like a true person. I try to humanize my characters as much as possible, always. It's what makes them conveying and immersive for the listener or reader, and I'm a character artist, or a wannabe character artist. So making characters and giving them full fleshed out personalities is what I love doing most. So why didn't I do that with Lucien? What made him so special? Well, I'm glad you asked. Lucien is supposed to be the true embodiment of toxic perfectionism. He's the representation of that voice in your head when you're a toxic perfectionist. His dialogue of, "Are you so pathetic you can't handle one simple task? Aren't you better than this? And do you really want to be so disappointing?" Those are all things someone might tell themselves when being a perfectionist of the toxic variety. As well, it was really important for me to give him some of those brief moments of pretending to care about Sav. Because when you think these things to yourself, you do it because you think it's what's right. It's a twisted way that you try to take care of yourself, but that's not care, that's mistreating yourself and an unhealthy coping mechanism. So I wanted to illustrate that thinking that way about oneself isn't okay by having you imagine, well, what if someone else that was supposed to take care of someone, like a parent, was saying that to their child? And obviously when you see Lucien saying that type of stuff to Savinica, you think obviously that's not okay. So why would it be okay to talk to yourself that way? Now we can contrast his character with Lenor's. One day I swear I will write a story without murder. One day. But that's not this story. In this story, Lenor is the polar opposite of toxic perfectionism. She's the part of you that knows you deserve better. She's the part of you that knows you deserve a break. And I wanted to make it really obvious that Sav going with Lenor would have been the better option, because the part that truly cares about you, the one that gives you breaks, leniency, and love, will always be more beneficial to you than the one that restricts. Now we can get into how Sav killing Lenor is different than her killing her father. Savinica killing Lenor signifies that in order to give in to toxic perfectionism, in order to reach the goal that that voice in your head promises, being the best at what you want to do, you'll be happy if you listen to it. In order to live that way, you need to crush a part of you. You need to destroy the part of you that is kind to yourself, and I wanted to portray that in the most horrific way possible, because in my opinion, it's one of the most horrifying things you could do to yourself. Ironically, giving in to toxic perfectionism, the thing that makes you think you'll be happy if you slowly neglect yourself, really will make you so miserable in the long run. Opposite to this, Savinica killing her father wasn't her destroying what his character represents the way that it worked with how Savinica killed Lenor. It was her assuming his role. Savinica killing Lenor was the destruction of a good thing, but Savinica killing Lucien was just a step to her replacing him, which is why the ending is basically spelling it out for you that she's letting that toxic perfectionism take over her. The best way to describe this is that Savinica, Lenor, and Lucien are just three parts of a whole person separated. Lenor, the kind side, Lucien, the fucking terrible side, and Savinica, the person who is affected by both ways of thinking. And this is also why their last breaths or thoughts are of relief. They have that through line. They have that thing that connects them to be a part of a whole. I made sure to include that. Finally, I would go into dissecting her design. I really wanted to because that's what I'm all about, but this video is just way too long already, and it's gonna be such a pain to edit. So I'll save it for my next video. If you made it all the way to the end, you might as well subscribe now if you haven't already. Another great thing would be if you left a comment about what you liked or you didn't like, anything you were confused about. I love hearing all kinds of feedback, and I love reading comments, and thank you for being here, and I hope to see you again.